For 50 years, one hidden deal controlled the world. Oil was sold in US dollars. And that gave America a superpower. Every country needed dollars. So the US could print money. And the world would still buy it. But now something huge is changing. China is quietly convincing oil giants. Sell oil in yuan instead of dollars. If that happens at scale, the system that powered America's dominance for half a century could start breaking. No tanks. No missiles. Just oil, currency, and power. And the country pulling the trigger might be China. So how did one secret deal in the 1970s shape the entire global economy? And why might it be collapsing right now? To get a sense of how big a deal this is, we gotta go back to the 1970s, when America was in a panic. In 1971, President Nixon basically told the world the dollar was no longer backed by gold. From that moment on, it was backed by vibes. Or by confidence. Nobody really knew, and it sent shockwaves everywhere. Then, in 1973, the OPEC oil embargo hit. Gas prices went insane, the economy tanked, and the dollar was on life support. America needed a miracle to keep the dollar on top. That is where the story takes a sunny turn. Between 1973 and 1975, U.S. officials, led by Henry Kissinger, flew over to the undisputed king of oil, Saudi Arabia, with an offer they couldn't refuse: oil for security. The deal was simple. America would provide the Saudi kingdom with all the military protection it could ever want. In return, Saudi Arabia would do two things. First, price its oil sales in US dollars. Second, and this is the genius part, it would invest all the money it made, these petrodollars, right back into US government debt. It was a masterstroke. Soon, other OPEC nations started following the trend. While not all oil was priced in dollars, this set a powerful global standard. Suddenly, any country that needed to buy oil, basically every country, had to buy US dollars first. It created a permanent, artificial demand for American currency. It was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by black gold. This crazy feedback loop was the bedrock of American power for half a century. The constant demand kept the dollar strong, making stuff cheap for Americans to buy. And the endless flow of petrodollars into US debt meant the US government could spend like crazy on its military and social programs, all financed with low-interest loans from the rest of the world. It was the ultimate life hack. America could print the world's money and then borrow it back to pay its bills. The US is the only one in the world doing this, an IOU country. But no empire lasts forever. Over time, huge cracks began to appear in the petrodollar foundation. The first one came from an unexpected place: America itself. Thanks to the fracking revolution, the US went from being the world's biggest oil importer to a major producer. That changed the original bargain. The whole oil for security deal looks a lot different when one side no longer desperately needs the oil. Political beef that used to get smoothed over by mutual needs started to bubble up. But the second crack was way more dangerous because it was about trust. As the uncontested king of the financial world, the US began using the dollar as a weapon. Think about it. If you want to punish a country, you don't just send in soldiers anymore. You cut them off from the dollar. The US has done this for years to countries like Iran and Venezuela, effectively kicking them out of the global economy. For the rest of the world, this was terrifying. The dollar wasn't a neutral tool for business anymore. It was a switch that Washington could flip whenever it felt like it. So countries began asking an uncomfortable question: are we next? This fear kicked off a quiet rebellion. Central banks started buying gold at the fastest pace in decades, basically hedging their bets against a world run by a single, weaponized currency. Quiet hedging is one thing. A full-blown panic is another. And in February 2022, the world watched the event that turned a slow leak into a potential tidal wave. When Russia initiated its special military operation in Ukraine, the US and its allies hit back with the financial nuclear option: they froze nearly $300 billion of the Russian central bank's foreign reserves. Let that sink in. With the flip of a switch, money that Russia thought it owned was just gone. For finance ministers around the globe, that was the ultimate wake-up call. It was a move that crossed a line. Everyone used to assume that a country's reserves were sacred. The freezing of Russia's assets completely shattered that idea. That sent a chilling message to every nation on Earth: your dollar reserves aren't really yours. They are conditional assets that you hold at the pleasure of the U.S. Treasury Department. Suddenly, de-dollarization wasn't just a nerdy economic theory. It became a matter of national security. China, holding over $1 trillion in U.S. debt, saw the writing on the wall. So did India, Brazil, and even U.S. allies. The message was clear: if you want real sovereignty, you can't depend on your rival's currency. The search for a Plan B wasn't just a good idea anymore, it was a necessity. And China was ready to build it. China has long viewed the petrodollar as a significant vulnerability. Imagine having to pay your biggest competitor in their own currency for the energy you need to survive. It's wild. The sanctions on Russia gave China the perfect excuse to accelerate its plan to challenge the dollar's throne. And China's weapon is a multi-pronged attack to build a parallel financial universe, one that doesn't run through New York. In 2018, China launched an oil exchange in Shanghai where oil futures could be traded directly in yuan. It's still tiny compared to the big leagues, but it was the first step. The rails for a new system were in place. In 2022, Chinese President Xi Jinping started making personal trips to Riyadh. They signed 34 agreements and, critically, began discussing seriously pricing some of their oil trade in yuan. To make it easier, their central banks set up a currency swap line, letting them trade directly without ever touching a dollar. Then, China went digital. In October 2023, the first-ever cross-border oil deal was settled using China's new digital currency, the ECNY. That is a potential game-changer. A digital yuan transaction can occur directly between two parties in seconds, bypassing the old banking and SWIFT systems that the U.S. controls. And this experiment is going global. It's called Project mBridge, a platform that enables cross-border trade using digital currencies. And who joined as a full participant in June 2024? Saudi Arabia. They're building the digital highways for a new world. So what happens when the world's biggest oil exporter, Saudi Arabia, starts seriously using these new highways to trade with its biggest customer, China? What does that mean? The end of the petrodollar isn't one big explosion. It's a chain reaction. And the moment Saudi Arabia starts selling a meaningful amount of oil to China in yuan, that chain reaction speeds up. For the United States, the consequences are huge. That exorbitant privilege starts to vanish. When countries no longer need to hoard dollars to buy oil, the artificial demand that has propped up the U.S. currency for 50 years declines. First, borrowing money for the U.S. government gets way more expensive. If countries like China and Saudi Arabia aren't recycling their profits into U.S. Treasury bonds, who will? To find buyers, the U.S. would have to offer higher interest rates. Imagine your credit card rates suddenly doubling. That's what could happen to the entire U.S. government, leading to higher mortgage and car loan rates for everyone. Second, one will feel it at the store. A weaker dollar means all the stuff we import, phones, cars, clothes, gets more expensive. The era of cheap stuff from overseas, fueled by a super strong dollar, would start to fade. For China, it's a brilliant move. Buying oil in yuan protects them from U.S. sanctions. More importantly, it creates a closed loop. The Saudis earn yuan selling oil, and where can they spend it? On Chinese phones, Chinese cars, and Chinese construction for their futuristic cities. This Petroyuan system deeply connects their economies and cuts America out of the picture. And Saudi Arabia. They're playing both sides like a pro. By getting friendly with China, they get leverage over Washington and diversify their economy. They're making themselves indispensable to both the reigning superpower and the rising one. However, the petrodollar is not going to die tomorrow. The global financial system is like a massive oil tanker, it doesn't turn on a dime. The dollar's dominance is still huge, built on decades of trust and habit. But the ship is turning. We are slowly moving from a unipolar world, dominated by a single currency, toward a multipolar one with multiple currencies. The dollar will still be a major player, but it will have to share the stage with the euro and, increasingly, the yuan. The BRICS nations, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and new members such as the UAE, Iran, and Egypt, are leading this charge. They now represent a bigger chunk of the world's GDP than the G7, and they're building their own parallel institutions. That isn't just about money, it's about power. It's the end of an era of undisputed American financial control. This shift is happening quietly, in trade deals signed in Beijing, in digital transactions on platforms like Enbridge, and in central banks slowly swapping out their dollars for gold. The foundations of the old world are cracking, and the scaffolding of a new one is going up. The weapon that could end American dominance isn't a missile. It's a currency, backed by the world's biggest trader and its most vital commodity. The battlefield isn't mud and trenches, it's the invisible financial system that dictates power and wealth across the planet. The exclusive pact between oil and the dollar is fraying. A new era has begun. When the dust settles, what kind of world will we be living in? And when the old king's reign is over, who will be left holding the crown? If you want to keep understanding the massive forces reshaping our world, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story is far from over. Meet Clara at DFTW tomorrow for more uploads.